In the children's story, Henry Hikes to Fitchburg, Ann Richards told us about two friends who traveled from Concord to Fitchburg, Massachusetts, taking different journeys, both men depending upon their unique skills and approaches to self-reliance. Henry David Thoreau, a transcendentalist, took an exploratory nature's pathway, and his friend, considering the 27-mile distance, took a more traditional and perhaps pragmatic pathway. Both, however, arriving at the same destination after different traveling experiences. Same goal, but different strokes for different folks, looking at life as Unitarians might choose to do, differently. That's also part of the essence of Transcendentalism. I've never been particularly attracted to dogma-based religious beliefs because I've always been driven to question the dogmas. I generally don't accept things at face value. I'm frequently looking for exceptions to the rules and generally disregard traditions that never made sense to me or were at the very least overly tired and perhaps no longer relevant. As Yoda, the Star Wars iconic Grandmaster of the Jedi, might have said about me, a born-again iconoclast you are. I was raised in a Jewish family. Though I enjoyed many traditions of Judaism, the actual beliefs never really strongly resonated with me, and I never really felt myself to be part of a religious community, a community of deep and lasting traditions for sure, but a community encompassing a particular belief system, well, not so much really. After my bar mitzvah, the coming-of-age ceremony for Jewish boys at age 13, I rarely attended synagogue, and I drifted away. During my medical training in Boston, I was strongly influenced by mentors who encouraged me to look at clinical problems, and by extension, a more inclusive range of life's issues intellectually. By this, I mean I was trained to look at clinical problems from at least 3 or 4 directions, sort of like points on the compass, hearkening to the spiritual traditions of many pagan cultures, in order to more fully understand the complexities, the benefits, and what scared me the most, the risks to my patients. I was rigorously mentored to transcend unidirectional or bidirectional thinking in order to consider the expanded range of diagnostic possibilities and the probabilities of each of those possibilities in a data-driven universe. Many of you are probably asking yourselves right now, what is Dan going on about? What does this have to do with Transcendentalism and Unitarianism? Well, just hold on, please. The American Transcendentalist movement originated in the early 19th century and was a philosophical approach to theology that transcended the conventional dogmatic dictates of traditional New England Christian churches and their Puritan underpinnings. Transcendentalism encouraged self-reliance and acceptance of perspectives of many individuals apart from those of the mainstream clergy. Cherishing idealism, the inherent goodness of people, and an examination and appreciation of the elements and rhythms of nature became fundamental to this philosophy, as did the role of independent thinking. These concepts stood in sharp contrast to the more dogma-driven beliefs and parochial dictates of mainstream church clergy, and constituted the foundational seeds planted and fertilized in the rocky soil of Massachusetts. Transcendentalists were attuned to look for evidence of divinity in nature and humanity. For many transcendentalists, divinity was not bestowed by God solely, but rather also arose from within each individual, encompassing elements of self-defined and self-sustained personal spirituality. Divinity was pervasive in nature and in all of humanity and was not limited by externally imposed constraints or dogmas. The Transcendentalists search for truths, whereas some have written that empiricism, knowledge derived from the powers of observation and experience, was discounted by the Transcendentalists. In my view, that's a short-sighted conclusion. likely based upon 19th century limitations on the acceptance of emerging scientific methods that utilize measured observations and hypothesis-based experimentation. Descriptive biology and mathematics were notable exceptions, though Charles Darwin was originally chastised despite the profound evidence of natural selection on the islands of the Galapagos archipelago, and Isaac Newton was viewed with suspicion as a mystic. Both Darwin and Newton were English Unitarians, by the way. Ultimately, Transcendentalists incorporated into their philosophy lessons arising from the 18th century Age of Enlightenment, when natural, physical, and biological sciences began to flourish, and political discourse also broadened towards more discerning, multifaceted perspectives, often resulting in elements of friction with the more constrained Christian theological explanations for life, understandings about God, and parochially dictated parameters for human behavior and even human associations. The Transcendentalists did not reject all beliefs encompassed in Christianity's dogmas, but rather they held views that transcended these beliefs to be more inclusive of what rationalism and enlightenment had postulated. Humans and human experiences were at least as important, and possibly more important, than many, but by no means all, teachings of mainstream Christian clergy. Additionally, and perhaps most importantly of all, Transcendentalists were also social reformers, supporting education for all, women's and workers' rights, and abolition. They held strong beliefs in the goodness and resilience of humanity and the capacity of individuals to transcend many of life's circumstances and challenges, fostering growth and well-being apart from strict traditional religious influences. Finally, Transcendentalists were often Congregationalists, members of independent, often democratically governed churches. Does this sound familiar? Quintessentially, Transcendentalists questioned dogmas and asked lots of questions, challenging the more limited messaging of Christian clergy. Do not Unitarians mistrust the relevance of dogmas and ask questions? When I lived in Boston, my apartment was just down the street from the First Church Unitarian Universalist on Marlborough Street, and a few blocks from the Arlington Street Unitarian Church just across from the Boston Public Garden. And as an aside, for those of you who know Boston, just around the corner from the Bull and Finch pub, the visual springboard for the television show Cheers, where everyone knows your name. Immersing myself in the history of New England, I was drawn to an examination of the American Transcendentalist movement. I read much of what Emerson and Thoreau had written and spent many afternoons and evenings in Concord, the literary epicenter of 19th century American Transcendentalism, and at Walden Pond, a serene place for contemplation, examination of nature, of self and self-reliance and spirituality, most notably for Henry David Thoreau. After completing my medical training, my interest in Transcendentalism lay dormant, as my professional career took me far away from Boston, where I had intellectually come of age. It was not until many years later, after I met my wife, Suzanne, that I had my first real taste of Unitarianism and began to rethink the connections with Transcendentalism. I felt as if I had found some long-lost roots that had never fully developed their deeper taps, and I became comforted by the fellowship and eclectic membership that flowed from this liberal theological community. Walking hand in hand with Suzanne, I began a journey towards Unitarian Universalism, fostering not just tolerance of diversity, a concept that sorely misses the point in my view, but more importantly, fostering the acceptance of diversity and the encouragement of individuals to explore and to question. Suzanne and I went to Boston in December 2006, and Suzanne performed a contemplative spiritual ceremony at the water's edge of Walden Pond on a crisp and frosty winter solstice evening, under a Maxfield Parish darkening bluish-black sky at twilight with moon glow and stars bursting forth, and I knew at that moment that I was hooked. Thoreau's ghost was surely watching and probably joyously laughing, assuming there are such things as ghosts. We attended a service at the First Church on Marlborough Street 2 days later. In my view, Unitarian Universalism is not a religion in the traditional sense, but more of a theological philosophy, a way of looking at the world and spirituality that stresses individualism and viewpoints apart from dogma. From my perspective, a religion is something that is more defined and based upon a set of beliefs that distinctly differ between religions. One cannot believe in Christianity and also believe in Hinduism or Judaism or whateverism. Unitarianism encourages the intellectual pursuit of truth that includes, subject to each individual's perspective and abilities, an examination of the paradigms of various religions. In Unitarianism, my views become more paramount, and how I interpret things is what matters most to me, not what I'm told to believe. I'm encouraged to examine religion and faith from multiple perspectives, like the 4 points of the compass, to draw my own conclusions and then generate the next set of questions to explore on my own personal journey. I own my own spirituality, and each of you owns your own spirituality also and your own journey. The Unitarian's journey is not built on a foundation of blind faith, but rather a set of guiding principles. The 4th principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And the 7th principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, are the closest links to what the 19th century Transcendentalists believed in, what set them apart from traditional churches of the day, and what distinguishes and continues to set apart Unitarians from other religious communities today. So just what is our Unitarian faith? Or asked another way, just what do Unitarians believe in? And do we all believe in the same things? I used to maintain there's no specific Unitarian faith, but now, presumably wiser, I think that was incorrect. I think one might reasonably posit that Unitarian faith means faith in one's self-reliance and in one's intimate and unique judgments, and in humanity more broadly, and in the beauty of nature, and in the waxing and waning rhythms of the season, and in reason, and in objectivity, and in science, and in charity, and in social justice, tolerance, and more important, acceptance of diversity, and in gun control and gun safety, and in working to reverse global warming and climate change, and in intellectual examination, and human resilience, and in empathy, and in compassion, and in unique spiritual exploration, perhaps even spiritual explosions and even spiritual fireworks, and for many, in God or gods in whatever manifestation may suit individuals' purpose under heaven. All of these beliefs mixed up together like a higgledy-piggledy alphabet noodle soup makes me hungry just thinking about it. If these are the elements of Unitarian faith, then I can adhere to that faith. I believe in these things, not just as rights, but also as responsibilities and actionable obligations. Each of you can make your own choices or even add others. Unitarians are the modern-day transcendentalists, and we look back with some pride on what our forebears taught us. We must continue to walk in their footsteps, and yet we must, most importantly, cast our own pathways for the future, and to expand on Robert Frost's celebrated sentiment, perhaps take the roads less traveled by, and that may ultimately make all the difference. Remember what Yogi Berra taught us: when you come to a fork in the road, take it. I don't think Yogi was a Unitarian, perhaps, but perhaps deep down he was. I will conclude with a sentiment from my childhood's Jewish tradition. Shalom Aleichem. May peace be with you in your hearts. Share your love with all. Thank you.